Okay, I'd like to call the Budget Review Committee to order. It's 7 p.m. We're in the Aldermanic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alderman at Large Laurie Wiltshire, Vice Chair.
Here.
Alderman at Large Brian S. McCarthy, absent. Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien, present. Alderman at Large David C. Tenza.
Here.
Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly.
Here.
Alderman Jan Smith.
Here.
Okay. And our Chairman Richard Dowd.
Present. Okay.
And also in attendance, we have Dory Clark, Esquire.
And other alderman.
Oh, and, thank you, I'm sorry, Alderman Gathright.
And laws.
Huh?
And laws.
Oh, and Alderman Brandon Laws, thank you. Catching up in writing, sorry, excuse me.
Okay. I think we're all accounted for at the moment. So the first order of business for the meeting is public comment. Is there anyone that would like to comment on anything coming before the Budget Committee this evening? Seeing no one. Communications.
We have communication from Dorothy Clark, Deputy Corporate Counsel. Reason summary of cost items, changes in the collective bargaining agreement for the UAW clerical, technical, and professional units.
If there's no objections, we'll move to accept the communication, place it on file.
Okay. Mr. Chair, may I recognize Alderman McCarthy
Okay.
in attendance?
Present. All right. Unfinished business,
There is none.
new business resolutions.
Yes, we have before us R 18017, approving the cost items of the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Nashua, New Hampshire, and UAW Local 2322 Clerical and Technical Unit from July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2020, and related transfers. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend final passage.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to recommend final passage of R 18017. Attorney Clark, would you like to come up and give us an overview?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, what you have tonight is the resolutions to approve the cost items for the two collective bargaining agreements with the two UAW units that we have here. At the city, there's also a UAW unit at the police department. There's a clerical and technical unit and a professional unit. Between the two of them, they have 121 employees. The majority of them are here at City Hall, but there's also a fair number of them that work in Public Works and a few at the fire department. And the Board of Public Works and the Board of Fire Commissioners have approved these two collective bargaining agreements. So that's why we're moving them forward to you for the cost items. I want to just recognize the negotiating team was myself, Dave Fredette, Lisa Photo, Sarah Marchant, and Larry Budrow.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Would you like me to go through the cost item changes, or do you think as long as everyone had a chance to look at the memo, they're reasonably self-explanatory?
Let's see if anybody has any questions.
Sure.
You all received the memo as part of the minutes, part of the agenda. Does anyone have any questions for Attorney Clark relative to either one of these contracts coming before us? Right now, we're on 017. Alderman Tenza.
Thank you. Attorney Clark, I don't have any questions about the cost items, but could you just outline a little bit more, basically who the 121 employees are, what kind of jobs that they do that's not included in the memo?
Oh, sure. And if you want a more detailed list, the Appendix E on both contracts has the list of all the job titles. I would say generally the clerical technical unit is a lot of administrative staff, the foreman at Park Rec, some different department clerks and coordinators. It's a fairly varied unit of mid-level clerical and technical staff here at the city. Another big category would be the people that work down at motor vehicle registrations. And then the professional unit is some of the more, I would say, I guess, technical jobs here, such as planners, some of the higher level accounting staff. Trying to think who else. Some of the DPW contract administrator. Like the laboratory people at the wastewater plant. So again, administrative staff, the professional unit, sometimes a little bit more technical skills or degrees.
Thank you.
Okay, all set, Alderman Spencer? So, and if you haven't seen it already, when Mrs. Lovering sends out the agendas, there's a link to all of the resolutions, so you can go and get the more detail in the. Any other questions for Attorney Clark? Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before you do call the vote, I would like the record to indicate that we have been joined by Alderman Lopez as well.
Very good. Okay. If there are no other questions, the motion on the floor is to recommend final passage to the full board of R 18-017, approving the cost items of a collective bargaining agreement between the City of Nashua, New Hampshire and UAW Local 2322 Clerical and Technical Unit from July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2020, and related transfers. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also before the board is R 18-018, approving the cost items of a collective bargaining agreement between the City of Nashua, New Hampshire and UAW Local 2322 Professional Unit from July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2020, and related transfers. Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion for final passage.
Okay, the motion is for final passage of R 18-018. Are there any additional questions for Attorney Clark? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. New business ordinances,
There is none.
tabled in committee.
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion to take from the table R 18-019.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Clark. The motion is to take R 18-019, which is the entire budget, from the table so we can discuss it. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before us is R 18-019, relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2019 proposed budget for the City of Nashua, General Enterprise and Special Revenue Funds. There will be a public hearing, and it is scheduled for May 17th of this year at 7 p.m. at Nashua High North Auditorium.
Okay, if the Chief Financial Officer would like to come up and bring up somebody can take Corporation Counsel, and anybody else like to be mayor for a day? Oh, there's one right here. Okay, and as you speak, please introduce yourself so the person that's trying to record will know who is speaking. And when we call on you again, please again tell us who you are so the people transcribing can get the names right. Mr. Griffin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and other members of the committee and the board. My name is John Griffin, for the record, CFO for the city. I'll be introducing the team members here shortly on my second slide, but just to set the table, the Financial Services Division is approximately 7.5 million, represented by several departments that deal with financial services matters. The number of full-time equivalents charged to this particular group of departments is 48.38, so that gives you the scale of the department and the division. With regard to financial services, approximately 2.086 million, 22.65 employees. Risk management, that's a department that handles all of our insurance policies and things of that nature, 3.6 million. City buildings, purchasing, assessing, and GIS. With regard to the senior management team, Dave Fredette to my right is treasurer, tax collector. Ruth Rasmick is not here, but she is the deputy treasurer, tax collector. Rose Evans to my left is the senior manager of accounting and financial reporting. Jennifer Deshay, which is over there waving her hand, she is the risk manager. To her right is Jay Honeywell, the building manager. Dan Kuchen, Attorney Bolton's seat, he's the purchasing manager. John Duhamel, chief assessor, is over here. Angelo Marino, GIS manager, is not here. And these two, the following two people, Carolyn O'Connor provides support to the Department of Public Works. You will see her when they come before you. Janet Graziano handles public health, community services, as well as community development and a few other departments. She'll be here as well as those departments present. With regard to the Treasury Unit, Treasurer Tax Collector's Office manages the cash and investments, things of that nature. Motor vehicle registration, parking violation is also underneath that umbrella. Collections and billings, we bill property tax, as you know, wastewater, and other services, and we attempt to collect those charges. Accounting and financial reporting, this includes all of the accounting for the city, culminates in the annual audit. We'll be here, Finance Committee, next Wednesday, where the external auditors will be providing you with a presentation. The invitation will go out later this week, as well as the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, which we refer to as the CAFR. This group, including the treasurer, Ms. Evans, and a few others, we annually participate in a bond rating call where we've been fortunate to receive AAA ratings from both Fitch and Standard & Poor's. And Ms. Evans and others, they do a great job putting the budget book that you have in front of you on an annual basis. Ms. Evans also oversees the accounts payable group. For those of you on the Finance Committee, you get that packet that has our record of expenditures, essentially our online checkbook. About 17,000 vendor payments. That gives you the scale and the magnitude made up of that department, which has 4 people. Purchasing, process all the purchasing orders for the city, coordinates the bids, sealed and unsealed, ministers and ensures compliance with the city ordinances, and also manages the printing and mailing services for the city. Risk management, provides the insurance coverage, develops safety training, and ensures compliance with all state and local laws. Oh, hold on here. It's a little fidgety. Maybe I can go this way. No. Apologize for this. Well, the previous slide, I know you've received this packet over the weekend, but the assessor's office is in charge of all of the full and fair valuing of the city's properties. As you all know, we have an upcoming statistical revaluation that this group will be instrumental in delivering and developing. And then finally, GIS is instrumental for a lot of departments as well as the citizens of the city who wish to tap into the technology, the GIS technology for mapping and other services. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you with regard to the departmental budgets.
Okay, before we go through the budget for these groups, in the agenda, you have the revenues and the appropriations for the different groups. And what we'll do is we'll take each one of these at a time. And if you have questions relative to revenues, for instance, the first one's financial services. The revenue is on page 35. And the appropriations are on page 112. Are there any questions relative? And Mr. Griffin, who's going to be answering the financial services questions?
So treasurer for debt will be taking those questions.
Okay. Does anyone have questions for treasurer for debt in this area? No. By the way, I will say for the new members, the fact that the city has a AAA bond rating is very important to the city and very hard to achieve. And so the group deserves a lot of credit for having us in that position. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I would like to ask Mr. Fedett, being also a state rep, but up at the House, it was also, we defeated in the House, I think, the bill that was going to eliminate trailers. It was not backed by the city clerks. And if it does get picked up by the Senate, which I hope it doesn't, could that hurt us? Is that going to apply to next year's budget? Are you familiar with that at all?
I think you're talking about House Bill 579,
Yes,
semi-trailers.
sir.
Actually, it was tabled at the full House.
Right.
Which it's very hard to get something untabled.
Right.
So we're hoping it just dies
Yeah.
because it's not a very good bill.
Yeah.
I mean, it's revenue for the local community, so I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But that bill was around for 2 years, and it, it was a struggle to get it to where it is today. So I want to thank everybody in Concord, and especially our reps that helped
Yeah.
us.
No, we did hear from our people, and particularly from the city, and that it would have been a loss of revenue for the city when it thrown us into a hole. So thank you, Mr. Fedett.
So I see in your area, things didn't change too much from last year, and,
On revenue?
yeah.
No, revenue continues to increase a little for mostly every area except some of the state revenue seems to be decreasing a little in the school area, but general revenue seems to be doing well. Interest rates, of course, as you know, are going up and have been for the last 18 months. So every time it goes up a quarter point, that's good for us because we can get higher earnings on our money as it's invested.
But does that affect our interest rate for borrowing money?
It will also, but we've sold in the last 6 or 7 years all under 3%, some years 2.1, 2.2, so we've been very fortunate. Even last year was like around 2.5, so
That's good.
I would think this year when we sell, it may be a little higher, but I'm still hoping that it would be under 3%.
Any questions for Treasurer Fedett? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next area. Thank you, Treasurer Fedett. Risk management, no revenues, and the appropriations are on page 114.
Mr. Chairman, Jen Deshay, the manager of that department, will speak, but this is an area, she'll get into it in a little bit more detail, but our workers' compensation claims have gone up relative to what we budgeted for last year. So that, of all the items in this particular division, this is the number that we had to increase, increasing the appropriation to this fund from the general fund up to 3.6 million from 3.242. So she'll get into a little more detail and show you what the lines are, but I just wanted to share that with you folks before she begins.
Okay, and as we go through these, if the person that's going to be explaining them wants to get in a little more detail about that area, that's fine.
Sounds good, so I'll
Okay,
pass it on to Jennifer.
On page 12,
oh, could you just identify yourself for the transcriber?
Jennifer Deshays, the risk manager.
Okay,
On page 12, item 59, insurance and claims. 59207, workers' compensation claims. Our
Mike,
budgeted.
excuse me, Jennifer,
Yes.
you may not be on the same page as these folks.
Is
These,
it
they have the
changed?
whole book, so is it the
It's
property
changed.
casualty, page 115?
Okay,
Next page, workers' comp is shown on page 116, so you
Thank
might
you.
have a different printout than these folks.
I don't have that, all right. We all set?
Also.
Okay. Our budgeted claim line items are based on a 5-year average with consideration, and we're currently seeing a rise in our workers' compensation costs. Although the frequency of our claims is basically level, we're experiencing spikes in our severity, which basically equals an increased indemnity payout and higher medical costs, aging workforce, repeat surgeries, and higher permanent impairment ratings. In addition, this upcoming fiscal year, we have claims that we're working towards lump sum settlements and closeout. I want to point out that in New Hampshire, we don't have a workers' compensation fee schedule, which is extremely challenging. So we've had to come up with creative ways to combat medical costs. This current fiscal year, we've saved $80,000 to date due to cold call medical bill negotiations. We started this program back in fiscal year 2010. We recently started exploring another avenue afforded to us by a change in the statute relating to usual and customary fees. It's very promising, and I'm hopeful that this is going to provide us with a better advantage over medical costs as it relates to workers' comp. And that's pretty much the explanation
okay.
for the increase.
Do we have questions? Alderman Lopez.
Well, with regards to the increased amount of accidents and severity, one of the characteristics of you said is it's because of an aging workforce. Are there any kind of trainings or steps being taken by the city to address things like, so you're getting older, don't lift everything without getting a friend or?
Well, we have a position in our office, loss prevention. Our loss prevention analyst, and that's exactly what he does. He monitors the claims, and he trains where we start to see trends. So if we see a trend in lifting or slip and falls or whatever it may be, he goes out there and he trains those departments. It's also important to point out that our budget is reflective of city and school. We handle the school claims and the city side of the claims. So yes, to answer your question, we do have a program in place.
Okay, glad to hear it.
All set, Alderman Lopez?
There was also an increase in salaries and wages. I was just curious if anyone wanted to speak on that.
Is that in general or just in that one area?
Under expenses of the same section. It's from 364,808 to 366.
I
Mr.
could,
Griffin, are those, you
Sorry.
want to address that? Those are non-affiliated and the step increases?
there's two items generally in this department. Well, actually, most of them are unaffiliated. Those would be pursuant to the increases that the Board of Aldermen just took action on with that ordinance. What we generally do, Alderman Lopez, is if to the extent there's collective bargaining agreements that haven't been fully negotiated yet and approved by the Board of Aldermen, we put that in contingency. And I'll share that with you, that the specifics of that when we get to that item.
Okay.
All set?
Yep, thank you.
Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. Yes, my question, I know when I was involved with fire, and I imagine we're still doing it, risk management, you have come to the different divisions and gone through and looked at the workplace and the environment and tried to do your best to make particular changes and to make a more safer work zone for our employees. Is that program still funded and still going on?
Yes, it is. We do that with every city and school building. Twice a year, we try to get out to all buildings to look at any kind of exposures or safety issues, or any way to make the employees' jobs easier so they're not hurting themselves.
Alderman O'Brien?
Yes, to a different subject matter. I'm very attuned to the SURF account, and I know we did have some vehicles that did get damaged. And when a vehicle does go through, I mean, we got to expect it. We're putting these vehicles out on the road. It's going to happen. It happens in my family. But does any of that money, where does it go if we win on the insurance claim with the other person? Let's say there was a liability of that other person that caused the accident. Does that money go into the SURF account to replace the vehicle or anything?
No. What we have an evaluation done of that vehicle. We have an appraiser come out, appraise the vehicle for what it's worth, and that money is what's going over to the SURF account. We then pursue a subrogation against that third party. We may not see that money for a year, 2 years. That's why we do it the way we do it. So we originally, based on the claim itself, transfer that money over to the SURF account. And then we pursue the third party.
Okay.
All set, Alderman O'Brien?
All set, thank you.
Any other questions for risk?
I'd just like to add, Mr. Chairman, on page 115, up in the revenue section, you'll see a line item claim recoveries. That's where that revenue would come in.
Okay.
In addition to that, a little bit confusing, this is an internal service fund, so pages 115 and 116 give you the detail, but the actual appropriation is on page 114, so unless this is changing, we're recommending to appropriate $3.6 million from the general fund into this internal service fund.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Seeing none. Move on. City buildings. Appropriations are on 117.
Jay Honeywell, City Buildings. Just a quick overview, a little technical glitch at the opening. I have 2 full-time custodians, 1 part-time custodian, and 1 full-time maintenance specialist on my staff. In my appropriations, you'll note, I'll draw your attention to it, the increase in wages for full-time. That is for an additional maintenance specialist to provide various levels of support to as many as 9 city buildings. So that's just a brief overview of my department, and all other increases, if any, is a modest one in property services across all the lines at $2,600, and that's based on purchasing guidelines and 3-year trend. So other than that, my budget's pretty straightforward, with the increase being in an additional staff person.
Okay. Questions for buildings? Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. Jay, I got to really personally thank you for all that you do with your staff and everything, and I agree with the extra help that you needed in doing it. But for the new members of the board that may not have a complete grasp, can you just tell us what buildings you actually do manage? There's several.
There are several. Well, the big 3 are City Hall, Public Health, and the Court Street Theater, and as well as the Senior Activity Center, 36 Arlington Street, 38 Arlington Street, 57 Gilson Road, which is a storage facility. Other city assets, as they're obtained, we provide some gap support for, such as 201 Main Street, 1 Pine Street Extension. Those facilities where support is needed, we provide it. And those change. Those are temporary as they get moved on in the process. So yeah, we do cover a lot of ground. I need a maintenance specialist to help out with that support during the day. The custodians primarily work at night in a custodial fashion, so I need a skilled person to assist with those operations.
Alderman Lopez?
You mentioned 201 Main Street, and you're adding another staff member. It doesn't take a lot of work to maintain that, does it?
No, and I don't think the end result will not be for my department to maintain or manage that facility. The city just closed on it last week, I believe, and so in the meantime, my department will go in and secure the facility, rekey the exterior doors, and maintain the systems required, for example, life suppression that are required by the fire department until that facility becomes occupied. When the cardholders develop the building and it gets turned over, my department will assist in carrying that facility until that time.
Alderman Lopez?
Was the Arlington Street Community Center one of the buildings you guys take care of?
Yes, it is. And that's another facility where I've realized a little change in use. The previous tenant pretty much took care of everything there as part of their lease agreement. Now with the change of use, it's requiring some more of my my department resources to maintain that facility. The aging of the facilities is also, taxing my resources as well with the health department. The buildings are getting older. And as renovations are done, we assist with that. So that's utilizing our resources as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions for buildings? Thank you. The next area is purchasing. The revenues are on page 37, and the appropriations are on page 119.
Dan Kuchen, Purchasing Manager. Revenues are pretty nominal for our department. That is mostly grants that we're able to bill for copy and print services, and it varies somewhat year to year depending on how much volume we're doing there. Copy and print work that is done generally for the rest of the city is not grant related, is built into our expense budget. The overall department, if you take out the budget adjustments, we're actually down a few $100s as compared to last year, so it's a very flat budget right now. We shifted some funds around a little bit, but not that much. We have 3.5 full-time equivalents. We have a 20-hour part-time person who does the mail and delivery services, and then a buyer who does a lot of the copy function, and a purchasing agent too that does most of the PO placing and the bid work.
Okay. We have questions. Alderman Tenza.
Could you just tell us what the advertising, you have allotted $31,000?
We, in our budget is the advertising for anything that the school is looking for. So when they're looking for a lot of the higher level people that they've been looking for the last couple of years, a lot of that is that. We've reduced that over the course of the last year or two, but it's still a pretty hefty number.
So if anyone from the Board of Education is listening and wants to save the city some money, they can retain the higher level people and we won't have to expend that.
And there's a lot of things they can do. I know our person talks directly with the school people in very detail about how are you doing the ads, because that can affect the cost pretty dramatically.
Sure.
So we're pretty well versed in making the ads as economical as possible.
Thank you.
Sure.
Alderman McCarthy.
Does that also cover our legal notices for meeting notices of the ZBA and planning board and those things?
I don't think so. I haven't been involved in that.
As I recall, I think those come out of city clerks.
I thought they were in here.
Mr. Griffin, do you know?
I thought I'm sorry, I thought they came out of planning, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Can we figure that out?
Guess we'll take that question.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All set, Alderman McCarthy?
Yep.
Any other questions for purchasing? No? Thank you. Okay, the next area is assessing overlay.
Chief Assessor will address
Okay.
any questions related to this particular budget.
Can you just give us a brief, sort of quick overview of what your group does?
John Duham, excuse me, John Duham, the assessor. Besides the salaries and wages, the only thing that increased in my budget this year is the dues and memberships, which is just a matter of people charging more for the things we subscribe to. Everything else is relatively flat.
Questions for assessing an overlay? Oh, their revenues are on page 38, and the appropriations are on page 121.
That doesn't, where is the overlay account itself?
To address that,
Mr.
Mr.
Griffin?
Chairman, when I first arrived here in 2010, overlay was actually an appropriated value. Matter of fact, Ms. Evans and I, excuse me, just talked about this today. What we do now is we, based on the recommendation from the Board of Assessors and the Chief Assessor, we assign a value, and that value is $2 million. What the overlay is designed to do is, to the extent we have applications for abatements that are granted or proceed up to the BTLA or the Superior Court, those monies are paid back to the taxpayer. So it's really a cushion for the city to be able to have that money to pay abatements. Now, as far as value, we put $2 million in this year's tax rate. We were fortunate enough to have very few abatements last year, so we moved over $1.7 million. And we actually, a part of the reserve, part of the general fund reserve has another $1.5 million in it, so we're pretty well protected from that standpoint. Whenever one goes through a statistical reval, though, we have to be cautious going forward on the next tax rate certification to make sure we understand the risks involved in taking a look at that annual $2 million overlay amount and seeing if we need to increase it. But I'd be happy to answer any other questions of John.
Alderman McCarthy.
So we're currently just carrying a blanket $2 million overlay appropriation number each year?
We're carrying, it's been $2 million for the last several years, and
Is that in the budget, or is that a number we add on the form?
I'm going to look to Ms. Evans as far as where it actually is, but it is part of the tax rate and the collection of the taxes.
It's set by the Department of Revenue.
Ms. Evans?
Yep.
So
Oh,
they-
okay,
they
sorry.
know who's speaking.
Okay. It's set by the Department of Revenue Administration, as you know. It's actually housed, I don't want to get into accounting terms, but it's housed currently on the balance sheet of the city.
So
Has-
it's on the, I think it's the MS1 form that we filed that has.
Yes,
It's
yes.
in there as a line item, and we just fill that in it.
It's actually
2
on the
million.
actual tax rate setting
Okay.
sheet that
So
comes from the
when the tax
DRA.
rate gets set, that gets netted out of,
Correct.
or added to the
It's netted out of the
appropriations,
property
basically.
tax, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So how do we fold back in the prior year's overlay as the cases get resolved?
We're essentially carrying that balance forward from year to year. And as CFO Griffin mentioned, we also, within part of our city's assigned fund balance is $1.5 million that the Board of Selectmen kind of tucked away many years ago. So that's available as well.
The Board of Assessors? Or-
Yes, sorry.
Okay. But I still, so when we close out the books, there's some amount of liability still outstanding against that year's overlay.
Correct.
Do we just, we just leave that untouched? And then
Correct.
2 years later, when.
If
when
we
those
need it,
cases-
it's there.
Okay. But ultimately, it gets folded back in as surplus, I assume.
Yes, exactly.
Mr.
Griffin?
Chairman, just to add a little bit more to that, it was only last year that we recognized on the advice of Corporation Counsel Bolton that several of these utility cases are becoming, they take a long time to settle or to be adjudicated, but we decided this past year, instead of taking the $1.7 million as surplus, we kept it on the balance sheet. So a few things are going on. There's these large cases where the utility companies that serve this area have gone through the process of filing for abatements and getting rejected at the local level, and then they go to the court system to get adjudicated. But the numbers are large, so we have to be cognizant of that. My latest intelligence from the state legislature is they basically decided, HB 324, they've decided to have another study commission to look into it, because as you can imagine, utility companies have a vested interest in keeping the property taxes as low as possible for their customers. We have a vested interest in making sure that we properly value the utility properties, and that will be just to make sure everybody understands that, there's a lot of competing interests going on. So we will have the options before us on the utility valuation as part of this statistical reval. It's about $280 million, I believe, of value that the utilities are assessed at on the MS1 form that we file annually with the state.
Alderman McCarthy.
So just so I understand it, at the end of each year, the taxpayer has 3 years to file for an abatement, correct?
An abatement at the local level by March 1st, following the final tax bill.
Of the year where the abatement is for, or?
You get your December tax bill, this December 18, you have until March 1st, 19 to file for the abatement at the local level, till September 1st to file beyond the local level.
Okay.
Just again, when you speak, please identify yourself for the transcriptionist. Mr. Griffin, do you anticipate any requirement for more funds based on the reevaluation that's being dictated by the state? Are people more apt to have issues with the new findings?
That's a great question. In 2004-05 time frame, the city had about 1,300 of its 28,000 parcels as folks filing for abatements. So I think this past year we had less than 100 abatements.
85, sorry, John Duhamel, 85.
So part of the proper value of residences, commercial buildings, et cetera, we need to, those of us that will be working on it and recommending to you folks what we do, will have to be cognizant of, should that 2 million be higher? That's, your direct question is, and we have time.
Yeah.
Because when we set the tax rate, we're gonna know what the new values are. We're gonna make sure everyone that's a property owner is gonna get their new value. They're gonna have time to come in and have an informal hearing, and then we'll be simultaneously doing a risk register of, how much we should put in. That's a subset of the utility situation, and that goes back to 2011, I believe. So they file as soon as they get their tax bill, they file for the abatement.
Okay. Any other questions in that area? Thank you. Now we're into capital and capital equipment reserve fund, SURF. Who's going to?
Treasurer,
If I have that pleasure. I think some of you, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Dave Fredette, City Treasurer. Some of you, we had a small presentation last week at Finance, so some of you were there for that. But if you look on page 260, where it says transfers in and out, if you look at line item 89726, That's the $1 million that we reviewed last week that the mayor has proposed, put an into serve that last column, fiscal year 19, $1 million. So that's where that number is found. And then on page 326 is the list of items that are going to be purchased in fiscal year 19. We've been putting that list in the budget book, I think, for 3 years now, based on a change in the ordinance. And then when the departments come forward to you, you can ask questions if you'd like on that list of items that are there. So that list, I believe, totals around 3.4 million. And we're gonna pay a little over 2, I think, in cash, and the rest was some bonded items. I think a fire truck and maybe some, I'll have to look, but I think there was a fire truck and some public works vehicles.
Just for the new members, could you sort of go over what the intent of the SURF account is for?
Yes, SURF is Capital Equipment Reserve Fund, and it's basically, in layman's terms, a savings account that we have to help pay for large dollar vehicles mostly, anything over $25,000. So we have somewhere in the vicinity of 250 line items and multiple worksheets that list all the vehicles. They all have a lifespan, and we calculate and estimate the cost it's going to be for those vehicles over a period of years, and we fund it each year depending on what is planned to be purchased for the next year. So right now, we have around $3 million in the fund. There's about $1.3 million that still needs to be purchased this year that was approved for fiscal year 18. The mayor's going to put $1 million in for 19, or that's what he's proposing. We're going to spend about $2 million in cash next year, plus $500,000 for the assessed, or the valuation that's going on in the city. I think that was explained in another hearing to the board. So that is a very quick overview of the Capital Equipment Reserve Fund, but it's, we do meet with each department each year on their list, and of course, the big ones are fire, police, and public works. Public works is definitely the largest, of course. All the other departments are much smaller. Transit, most of their vehicles are paid through a federal grant. I think 80% is paid by the federal government. We pay around 10%, and or maybe 20%, I forget exactly, but it's different sometimes with the type of vehicle they're buying, but that's basically how it works.
Alderman Wiltshire?
Thank you. Earlier this evening, I was at the National Police Commission, and they had talked about a Bearcat being purchased. Where would I find that?
That was already approved the last year in fiscal 18, and actually the purchase order, well, the purchase rec has been placed, and I think it's on the agenda for the next finance meeting.
Yeah, Dan Kuchen, purchasing manager.
Yeah.
It is on the agenda for the next.
They have a couple items I saw going on the agenda.
Thank you.
Alderman Lopez?
Just for Alderman Wilshire, that's the Bearcat that broke down in the middle of a standoff that we had to tow back?
That's the 2003 Bearcat that we're looking to replace. in the
I just
city
figured I'd
limits.
clarify in case someone was like, oh, look, they're expanding. And it's more like, no, we're kind of just fixing
No,
things.
it's
Thank you.
replacing. Any other questions?
I just had one.
Yes.
The Public Health Department had a request a couple of years ago to replace the public health van through a grant, and I don't think I've seen a new public health van driving around. Did that ever get replaced or no?
I don't remember, but like I said, there's 250 items on that list, so I don't remember a van being purchased, or maybe it was.
Okay.
This has had nothing to do with the one that was originally tied into St. Joe's Hospital, was it?
I thought that was what the idea was,
Well, that thing
so that didn't work out.
had many lives. I'm not sure what happened to that.
Okay, well, that's the health department more.
We want to take that for questions? Okay. All right. Alderman Kelly?
Thank you. I had a question about how we project for technology. So, for example, we had someone in here and we were talking about brining trucks. So I imagine those are more expensive than trucks they would have thought of a number of years ago. So how do we handle that as we're projecting what should go in the surf?
Well, like I said, we meet with the departments each year, so I know over the last 10 years, vehicles and public works have changed. You know, they have the CNG vehicles where years ago we did not. Those are, of course, more expensive to purchase. Of course, they're cleaner to use in the environment. So it's really the departments that look at that more in detailed. And when we meet with them, discuss what they'd like to purchase, and if it seems affordable, we put it in the list. But it's really the departments that look into that more in detail.
Any other questions? Alderman Tenza.
Thank you. In our first budget meeting, we heard from the airport authority, and they had requested money be put in SURF for a tractor that would help them. Is that money included in the public works budget, do you know? Or would that be a separate line item?
Airport,
Yes.
it would be well, the airport's a little different. They usually pay for their own vehicles because they don't really get a lot of money from the city. So I'm not aware of what that what that vehicle is, but
Alderman McCarthy, you want to?
Yeah, they had asked that the city buy them a vehicle. They have a tractor that they use for mowing the lawns, which, as I understand it, it takes them 2 weeks to do the mowing every week. So what they wanted was a better piece of equipment that can actually keep up with the load, and they had asked that the city contribute that through SURF. It wouldn't be in the public works budget, it would have been in the SURF contribution, and I don't think it's there.
well, they didn't ask. It's the first I've heard of it.
I think that we were going to bring that up when we have the BPW, because it had to be some agreement between the airport authority and direct photo.
Hmm.
Any other questions? I think they had some kind of agreement on its use, maybe beyond just the airport, so I'm not sure how that works. But we will address that when BPW comes before us. Okay. So, any other questions regarding SURF? Thank you, Treasurer, for that. Capital improvements.
I could take that, Mr. Chairman. John
Griffin.
Griffin, Chief Financial Officer. You will note on page
262.
262, that is the mayor's proposed request. It's lower than last year, but when the BPW and the DPW folks come in, the solid waste department needs a roof over their electronic equipment that's dropped off, so we can, for lack of a better term, de-water that. We're paying a lot of money for the electronic equipment to be hauled away, and it's weighed down by water. So the mayor proposed the $872,500 here as a recommended capital improvement appropriation for fiscal 19. And it's a good format that we have. We have last year's items, the funded amounts, and then the proposals.
Okay. Questions on capital? No one? Okay.
I had one.
Nope. Alderman Lopez.
It might, so my question really is just, should we address specific capital improvement projects to the departments that are doing them? Looking at the list that's on 263?
Mr. Chairman, I think that'd be a great idea.
Okay.
And that's why we basically put in the department that requested the capital improvement, and they're most knowledgeable about the improvements.
Well, the agenda said look at page 262, so I went to 263 and wanted to make sure I was in the right place.
So all of the different divisions go through the capital improvements process, and so they have all the details of what they've requested and what was approved and. Okay, all set, Alderman Lopez?
Thank you.
Okay, now we're into other. Department 159, water supply, public hydrants on appropriations are on page 166. As I recall, I think that's the same as last year, nothing's changed, right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, John Griffin, CFO. This is the exact same number as last year. As you may recall, we put in the Pennachuck water increase in last year. And we're comfortable, based on communications we've received from Pennachuck, that the 3.1 million would be a good number for next year. How this works is there's a number of hydrants in the city. The Pennachuck folks keep track with the fire department. They keep track of the adds and subtracts. And then we get charged for the water. It's really a water charge. So it's 3.1 million, so it's a sizable amount, but it appears that it's very well operated.
Alderman McCarthy?
It's not the water charge, this is depreciation on the pipe in the ground, in the
Yeah.
rate base for Pennachuck. So it's basically what they're entitled to based on the existence and use of the hydrants because of what it's gonna cost them to
Right.
replace them.
Thank you for the clarification. We get billed on an inch-foot basis, basically, but
Okay.
thank you.
Any other questions on the public hydrants? No? Street lighting? Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Chairman, street lighting, as you can see, last year we budgeted 600,000. This year we're comfortable moving that down to 500,000. I believe the LED project is fully implemented. There might be a few areas, especially some custom lighting. So that's the reason we feel comfortable moving it down, because the costs are less to operate those lights. You'll notice an increase in streetlight maintenance. We have to position any replacement lights at the DPW to be at the ready to be replaced should some lights malfunction. So that's the tariff we're under right now. So we would, if there was a light that went out, the DPW folks would notify Eversource, and they would come literally and pick up the light and go put it in. So we're working with Duke Grant. He felt comfortable that 75,000 was a good number for starters, and then we can adjust accordingly.
Any questions? Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, were the lights all converted before the start of FY18?
Not all of them.
Because if I look at the electricity budget of 500,000 for 2019, and then I go back and look at the actuals through the end of February, which would be 6 months. If I double that, it's more than 500,000, and I'm not sure how. Of course, that does include the 3 darkest months, so you'd expect that to be a little more than half. I'm just wondering if we're comfortable that it'll fit in 500,000.
Maybe I can explain, and then Ms. Evans can help me out if I go awry. This was a multi-month project, and what Eversource does is they bill you under the current tariff. And then in April, I started getting on them, and then May and June, they came through with literally crediting us for the overcharges, because the lights went in November of 16 through April of 17. So it's complicated. So that we got the credits running through, and then this year, Ms. Evans, is there another bit of information that I'm missing?
If I could
Ms. Evans?
clarify the question.
Okay.
So we don't pay based on metered usage because they're not metered. We pay based on hours of darkness and the fact that they know when they go on. Do we have a schedule that says our bill will, in FY 2019, will not exceed $500,000? Because they should be able to tell us what they're going to charge us now.
We have the type of light, the estimated usage of each light, and a calculation. And why I'm comfortable with the 500,000 is I'm hopeful it could be as low as 400,000. So hopefully that answers the question. But we're trying to be a little conservative with that. But this number was about 850,000 before the city invested in this new technology. Now, we bonded it, so you're going to see it in the debt service schedule. But once we get the bonds paid off, it will inure to the benefit of the city going forward.
Ms. Evans?
Rose Evans, Accounting Manager. I just want to point out that the figure that you see there for actual expenses is through January, so it's actually 7 months. And come March, well, daylight savings comes into play. The bill drops,
Oh, okay, yeah. So
quite a bit because obviously you have more light. So I think we're comfortable. We're going to be on, on target for roughly 500,000.
Any other questions on street lighting? Okay. Seeing none. Pensions, and that's on appropriations on page 92.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, that you're going to see a very small number on page 92, because that's actually the pensions that are paid to our oldest pensioners. There's 2 or 3 left. What I'd like to call your attention to is page 21. This is where, so the pensions are in everybody's budget because they're where the employees who create the pension liability are located. This particular page captures all of the pension expenses. 52,150 is the pension expense. So 2 things are going on there. One is the Department of Public Works, Board of Public Works has their own pension for the Board of Public Works employees, but the majority of employees in the city are in the New Hampshire retirement system. So in there, so if you looked at when you look at the DPW departments, they're going to have a pension expense, but it's going to be related to their particular pension program. What's significant about this year, or just what noteworthy, is this is not a rate change year for the New Hampshire retirement system. It changes every 2 years. So the increase, and it's roughly $800,000 increase from last year to this year, is solely related to wages. If you followed this process over the last several years, the increases in the employer rates to the city of Nashua have been quite significant. And fortunately, this year, the increase, the same employer rates, but they're just on larger values of wages. And that would be true as well, Mr. Chairman, of FICA and Medicare. It would increase relative to the increases in wages.
Okay. Questions? No questions on pensions? Okay. Debt service?
Dave Fredette, City Treasurer. On page 255, and I do realize there's some newer aldermen here. Alderman, I usually give a small presentation on debt service once a year or so, and that has not been done, but maybe that should be done sometime in the next few months. But this page here on page 255 shows our projected payments for next year. Actually, it's basically flat compared to this year. It's $16,503,000 versus $16,499,000. So although some of our debt service is being paid off, we anticipate selling some bonds in July. So some of those payments, interest payments, will be due in fiscal year 19. And I want to explain, this page here only represents general operating or general fund debt that's paid by property taxes. We have other debt in the book that is paid either by enterprise funds or special revenue like the Pennachuck bond They pay us monthly and quarterly, and that stays in a special account, and the bond payments are made right out of those accounts. And of course, the wastewater has quite a bit of debt, and that's all in the enterprise fund there. So this dollar value here represents general fund or general operating debt.
Okay. Questions?
I just have one brief
Alderman
question.
Tenza.
Thank you. The 16,500,000 for FY '19, does that include the new debt to be issued, or will that be on top of?
That includes projected new debt, which you would find on there's pages after that, such on page 257. At the bottom, it says new debt to be issued. I have performing arts, building, acquisition, Burke Street property, and citywide deferred maintenance. Now, those are all estimates, and they may not actually be sold, but something else might be sold. I'm not sure, I have to estimate at the time based on capital improvements review. Well, I know the performing arts, we issued the check on March 13th, I believe. So that's gone, that $2 million is gone, so we'll be selling that for sure. But Burke Street, I don't know, until we know what we're gonna do with that building, I'm not sure if I'm gonna sell that remaining 1.2 million. Just to refresh everybody, that building was 4.2 million. We did sell debt for 3 million, but we did not sell the 1.2 because at the time that we sold that debt, there was discussion of putting a for-profit entity in the building, and that would affect your bond sale, because sometimes you have to sell a taxable bond versus non-taxable. And citywide deferred maintenance is something that may happen, or maybe a smaller number, but there's lots of divisions that have all this pent-up deferred maintenance that needs to be done. And there's been discussion of having a bond to help, especially the HVAC problems in quite a few different buildings. So that number, though, is included in the 16,503,000, that estimate anyways.
All set, Alderman Tenza? Alderman McCarthy?
So the other 1.2 million for Burke Street was just extended from the general fund, or?
Yes.
So we basically owe the general fund 1.2 million to make it whole at some point.
Yes. I was hoping we'd make it whole in 19, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
We do that from time to time. Just like the Performing Arts Center, we did pay for the building 2 weeks ago. So when we sell that bond this summer, we'll repay the general fund.
Does that also include the projected surf acquisitions that you might have to bond for?
Yes, but those are solid waste items, so they would be in solid waste.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Griffin?
Yes, just as Mr. Fredette spoke about the Pennachuck Special Revenue Fund, it might make sense to take a look at that on page 299 and 300. It's a big number. And as you go through the special revenue accounts, you'll see Pennachuck Bond Fund. The pink pages have all the special revenue accounts, not only for the city, but the school as well.
The bond payment there is almost $9 million every year. That's a 30-year bond. It's the only 30-year bond we have.
A few weeks ago, the alderman had an opportunity, a lot of the aldermen had an opportunity to get a walkthrough at the Pennachuck, and they gave us an overview of just how they're paying the city and how the bond thing works.
Right.
So it was pretty detailed. But for
They're never late.
members that didn't attend, what?
They're never late. 25th of
The
the
owner
month.
would be upset.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, going on. Contingency on 259.
John Griffin, CFO. General contingency, contingency for police grants, and contingency for negotiations have been with us for several years. General contingency is just that, it can be used for general items, unforeseen and unbudgeted. Contingency police grants, that's the city's match. And contingency for negotiations, as I mentioned earlier, this is an area where we put the dollars that are going to eventually reside in the accounts in which the employees work. We put them here because they haven't been approved by the board. They might not even be negotiated, but they haven't been approved by the Board of Aldermen. So in here would be the patrolman, police UAW, several school bargaining units. What happens as you did tonight, members of the Budget Committee, is when you approve the cost items, you also approve the related transfers. So these monies would go from this account to the, for example, where the members of the UAW, the different departments, the money would go there to pay for their increase.
As soon as the full board approves it.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's correct, yeah. You recommended final passage, right?
Okay, any questions on contingency? Alderman Tenza?
Sorry.
No problem. That's what we're here for.
Are there other city departments that would benefit from contingency funds that they could leverage for grant, like the fire department, public works, public health? Or is the general contingency fund enough that if they need some matching funds for a grant, the city has the money available to cover it?
This is the, John Griffin, this is the only general contingency amount, and it's used from time to time. I believe we used it for the match, the city's match, subject to check. Sometimes we use it for a city match of the Greeley boat ramp. Something that came in front of us, we took an opportunity to have matching funds, et cetera. But the planning of grant applications is not complicated, but it needs to be. We need to know what the city's obligations are going forward, and we plan for it.
So if I may just follow up, is there, I guess my question then, is there a reason that the police have a special contingency fund but other departments don't?
Ms. Evans would be able to handle that one. That's been here for a while.
Rose Evans. This is an annual grant that the police department has had. It's the Violence Against Women grant. Excuse me. So this is a recurring item. Typically, you know, oftentimes, a couple of times actually, the fire department has received a grant and has found matching, you know, funds in either their equipment line or something of that nature. And various other departments could use some of the general contingency for a grant match. But the reason the police is here is because, as I said, it is recurring.
Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, I think if you look at the contingency line items in general over the years, as a matter of policy, what we put in there is a general contingency number that's for everything that's unexpected. And the rest of it is for things that we expect to happen, but that might not, like a particular recurring grant or the negotiations. We generally know about what the numbers are going to be, but we haven't decided on them yet. So we don't want to put them in the department budgets until the negotiations are completed. But we carry that, so we carry that in a special contingency line.
I believe that anything transferred out of contingency has to be approved by the board, right?
Correct.
So it would come before us again. Like on the negotiations, when, as he said, when we were doing those two unions tonight, we also approved the contingency transfers to pay those salary increases. Okay, any other questions on contingency? And last but not least, interfund transfers, appropriations on page 260. Mr. Griffin?
CFO, this is the array of transfers that we typically request your approval of. So transfer to solid waste fund. The solid waste revenue does not equal the solid waste expenses, so there's a traditional general fund contribution to that department. The next line, transfer to city retirement ETF, that's an expendable trust fund that we put in 500,000 as an estimate. We don't really know with full clarity who is going to retire, but when individuals retire in various city departments, this particular fund is transferred into their operating budget to pay that. To the extent there's not enough money left in this account, they find it, particularly police and fire, they find it within their budget if they can. Otherwise, they'd have to potentially use the general contingency. As Treasurer Fredette indicated, the SURF transfer, there's that million. Next few lines, the city has cell towers where we receive revenue. This is the appropriation side of the revenue. So the cell tower revenue is in the revenue pages. These are various transfers into the Holman Stadium Improvement, Expendable Trust Fund, Mine Falls Park, and the David Dean Skate Park. And there's an annual transfer to the Stellos YMCA for some improvements that went on before I arrived back in, I think, 2009 and 10, $25,000 payment. Then the downtown improvements ETF. On an annual basis, we capture the revenue from parking, and we subtract what was the base parking amount, $728,000 in particular. So any revenue in excess of that amount goes into the Downtown Improvement Committee ETF, and funds are expended on downtown improvement activities. But the Downtown Improvement Committee comes before you folks and explains what they're going to do with the money. So this is the money going in. We know the number because it's a calendar year number. So we were able to put that number. We were able to calculate that this year and put it in the budget. The other items were one-time items. Jackson Mill ETF, that was where the city received $500,000 in proceeds from a closing of a clock tower refinancing. And the other one, the last one, downtown redevelopment, that was the sale of a parking lot to Saints Medical Center. So that's the transfers that we request approval of. Thank you.
Any questions on transfers?
Yeah.
Alderman McCarthy.
So why do we not anticipate a transfer into the solid waste fund?
Yeah, great question. It happens every year. This is the transfer. Let me see if I can explain it. This is the transfer that was approved by the Board of Aldermen last year. So we don't duplicate efforts. We don't put the transfer this year in. We've got it in the green pages. So we've got revenue. I'm going to round it off. We got revenue of $3 million. We got expenses of $7 million. So when you total everything up, you're short $4 million. That has to come from somewhere. It comes from the general fund. So next year, whatever the number is in the green pages this year is going to show up in the available budget. But it's just a way that
In the budget that appropriates it in order to have it in the amount to be raised by taxes.
So in the you want to
Well,
handle
that's because when you do the MS forms, the difference is just raised through the property tax rate.
Okay, so in the MS1 form, we add up the appropriations in the special revenue funds and the general budget?
Yes.
Okay.
So the difference, the whole, is raised through the tax rate.
Just one other point, Mr. Chairman, when you look at the resolution, you're going to see the general fund in the first paragraph. Then you're going to see the enterprise funds, and that's where you're going to see that shortfall. There's going to be like 20 million in revenue, 24 million in expenses. You need to get to the 4 million.
Mr. Chairman.
Alderman McCarthy.
I guess I'll just renew my annual observation that if we changed the solid waste enterprise fund into the landfill operations revenue fund and took collection and put it back in the public works budget, we wouldn't have to go through this every year.
Okay. Any other questions? Any general questions?
Yeah, I got,
Alderman McCarthy?
yeah, I want to go back to the self-insurance fund again, property and casualty. This didn't click until after we were past it. Last year, that fund shows revenues of 3.527 million and expenses of 3.813. And this year, revenues of 3.825 and expenses of 4,089,000, which I assume means the deficit in there is coming from the fund balance in that account. What is the fund balance now going down, or I also note that we seem to underestimate revenues, so that the number that we talked about before of claim recoveries bumps the fund balance back up. But I'm just, where do I find the year-to-year fund balance in the book? Is it in there under special revenue accounts or something, or?
Ms. Evans will explain that.
No, Alderman McCarthy, we don't have the balance of the risk management fund. They are online, published every month.
Okay, so it's in, I mean, I know it would be in the monthly report, but.
But, Mr. Griffin, thank you. The current balance is 1.1 million.
Is what?
1.1 million.
And what was it last year? Do we know?
694,000.
Okay.
But again, a lot of it's timing of everything when the claims come in, and these claim numbers, Jennifer, probably are through, January? Right.
Correct.
And then, come July, we are required to have an actuarial analysis performed on the fund that basically looks at any potential liabilities, and those are essentially booked in this fiscal year.
So I guess if I'm looking at these numbers, if it's actually up by $500,000 over what it was last year, that can basically only be attributed to delayed claims more than anything else.
Correct.
So we'll see something next year that will.
Correct. We really, Yep.
Any other questions? Seeing none, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming this evening and going through the finance division.
Thank you.
And have a good evening. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion to table R 18019.
Okay, motion on the floor is to table R 18019 until the next budget hearing, which I believe is on Thursday.
No, it's not.
Any discussion?
There
What?
isn't. We canceled that meeting.
Yeah, that's right, we canceled that meeting because of, and so I think it's April 2nd then, if I'm not mistaken. So, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Next item, general discussion. Anybody have anything they want to bring up? Seeing none. Public comment, there's no public here. Remarks by the alderman? None, okay.
Oh, I got one.
Alderman Lopez.
Just want to wish everybody a happy Easter / April Fool's Day.
Yeah, okay. And a possible, we don't need a non-public. Do I have a motion?
Move to adjourn?
Alderman, motion by Alderman Wiltshire to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We're adjourned at 8:25.